In the spring of 1961, a Soviet general walked up to an American agent in New York City and offered to betray his country. He didn't want money. He didn't want to defect. He didn't want a new identity or a house in the suburbs or any of the things that spies usually ask for when they switch sides. What he wanted was simple, and in some ways far more terrifying to the men who heard it. He wanted to make sure the Soviets didn't win. His name was Dmitri Polyakov. He was a major general in the GRU, Soviet Military Intelligence, the organization that ran spies across the entire world. He was decorated, respected, trusted completely by the Soviet leadership. He had fought the Nazis as an artillery officer, survived the bloodiest war in human history, and risen through the ranks of the most secretive military machine on Earth. And for the next 25 years, he handed everything he knew to the United States of America. The KGB would not find out for decades. And when they finally did, it was not because their own people caught him. It was because an American traitor sold him out. This is the story of TOPHAT, the crown jewel of the CIA, the most damaging spy in the history of Soviet intelligence, and the man who may have single-handedly kept the Cold War from becoming something far worse. To understand what Polyakov meant to the United States, you have to understand what the GRU was. Most people have heard of the KGB, the Soviet secret police, the organization that monitored citizens, crushed dissidents, and ran domestic terror as a tool of government. The KGB was fearsome, but the GRU was something different. It was the foreign military intelligence arm of the Soviet armed forces, responsible for running agents, gathering technical secrets, and mapping the military capabilities of every nation the Soviet Union considered a potential enemy. In the early 1960s, the GRU had agents operating across the globe. They were disciplined, professional, and nearly invisible to Western intelligence. Until Polyakov. He had first been posted to New York in the early 1950s, working at the Soviet mission to the United Nations, where he ran a network of Soviet spies under diplomatic cover. By 1959, he was back in New York for a second tour. It was during this posting that something shifted inside him. He had fought for the Soviet Union with everything he had. He had watched men die beside him in the snow outside Moscow. He believed in his country, or at least he had believed in the idea of it. What he was seeing now was something different. The Communist Party elite had become bloated, corrupt, self-serving. The principles he had gone to war for had curdled into something unrecognizable. And he had watched Soviet leadership deny his seriously ill son access to a hospital in New York that could have saved his life. His son died. Polyakov never forgave them. In late 1961, he made contact with the FBI. He was calm, methodical, precise, a soldier, not a dramatic defector. He did not want to leave. He wanted to stay exactly where he was, inside the GRU, rising through its ranks, feeding the Americans everything they needed to understand the Soviet military machine from the inside. He would be their eyes in the dark. The FBI was stunned, then suspicious. A Soviet general walking in voluntarily, asking for nothing? It was the kind of approach that could be a provocation, a KGB trap designed to feed disinformation to American intelligence and send them chasing shadows. It took time, and it took patience, and it took Polyakov delivering information so accurate, so verifiable, so damaging to Soviet interests, that skepticism had no choice but to give way to something close to awe. He was handed over to the CIA, who gave him a series of code names: TOPHAT, Bourbon, Rome, Donald. And what he delivered in the years that followed filled 25 file drawers at CIA headquarters in Langley, an almost incomprehensible volume of secrets, gathered over nearly 2 decades of the most dangerous double life imaginable. Polyakov revealed the names of Soviet agents operating inside Western governments, including Frank Bossard, a British guided missile researcher who had been selling secrets to Moscow for years. He passed along the complete technical specifications for Soviet anti-tank missiles, information that fundamentally changed how NATO planned to fight a ground war in Europe. He provided monthly Soviet military strategy reports. He mapped the GRU's global network. He revealed which American military officers the Soviets had recruited as informants, allowing the CIA to quietly neutralize them before real damage was done. And perhaps most consequentially, he reported something that the CIA already suspected but could not confirm, that the relationship between the Soviet Union and China was not the ideological brotherhood it appeared to be from the outside. Behind closed doors, the two communist giants were in furious conflict. Territorial disputes, ideological disagreements, mutual suspicion that had curdled into something approaching hatred. Polyakov's intelligence confirmed it in precise, operational detail. That confirmation reached Henry Kissinger and Richard Nixon. It was one of the key pieces of intelligence that gave Nixon the confidence to open relations with China in 1972, a diplomatic masterstroke that fundamentally reshaped the Cold War balance of power, driving a permanent wedge between the two nations that the Soviet Union most feared seeing united against it. All of this came from one man, a general who rode past CIA headquarters on a U.S. embassy trolley, transmitting encrypted bursts of intelligence through a device disguised in his hand. A man who passed documents through hollow stones and fishing rods, with secret chambers and dead drops so carefully arranged that for years the GRU had no idea anything was wrong. He asked to be paid only $3,000 a year. He accepted most of it in the form of Black & Decker power tools, fishing lures, and hunting equipment. He was an amateur cabinet maker and an avid fisherman, and he asked for nothing that would draw attention. No luxury cars, no foreign accounts, no visible signs of wealth that might make a colleague wonder. He passed the expensive watches the CIA occasionally gave him along to GRU colleagues as gifts, maintaining the appearance of a loyal, modest Soviet officer right to the end. For nearly 2 decades, it worked. In 1980, the summons came. Polyakov was recalled to Moscow. The CIA lost contact. At Langley, his case officers began the anxious ritual of checking Soviet publications, hunting magazines, fishing journals, for any sign of the signal he had agreed to use if he was in danger. The signal was a recipe. If Polyakov published a recipe for coot, a small water bird common in Eastern Europe, in a Soviet magazine, the CIA would know he was compromised. In 1984, scanning a Soviet hunting publication called Okhota, CIA officers found it. A recipe for coot stew printed under Polyakov's name. The crown jewel was gone. What the CIA did not yet know was that Polyakov had been betrayed not by Soviet counterintelligence, not by any mistake of his own, but by 2 Americans, men who had sworn the same oaths as the agents Polyakov had trusted with his life, and who had sold those lives for money. The first was Robert Hansen, an FBI agent who had begun passing intelligence to the Soviets in 1979. Hansen gave Moscow Polyakov's name. The Soviets investigated, but Polyakov's impeccable reputation and decades of loyal service protected him from immediate arrest. The second betrayal came in 1985, when CIA officer Aldrich Ames handed a list of names to Soviet officials in Washington in exchange for $50,000 in cash. Polyakov's name was on the list. This time, there was no escape. He was arrested in 1986. He endured 2 years of harsh interrogation. In 1988, a Soviet military tribunal convicted him of treason and sentenced him to death. He was executed on March 15, 1988. The CIA did not learn of his death immediately. The first confirmation came in an almost surreal moment. At the 1988 Moscow summit, when President Ronald Reagan asked Soviet General Secretary Mikhail Gorbachev about the possibility of a prisoner exchange. Reagan raised the name of a GRU officer being held on espionage charges. Gorbachev's response was brief and final. That man, he said, had been executed 2 months ago. At Langley, CIA officer Jean Vertefeuille, who had worked to identify the traitors who had destroyed so many assets, said only, "It was a bad day for us when we lost him. It was more than a bad day." Dmitri Polyakov had given the United States a window into the Soviet military machine that no satellite, no intercepted communication, no amount of technical intelligence could have provided. He had confirmed the Sino-Soviet split and helped drive American foreign policy toward one of its greatest strategic victories. He had exposed Soviet agents across the Western world. He had filled 25 file drawers with secrets that changed how America understood its enemy, and in doing so, helped keep a Cold War from becoming something no one could have survived. He did all of it for $3,000 a year and a set of power tools. The KGB never caught him. The GRU never caught him. The Soviet Union, for all its apparatus of surveillance and paranoia and control, never found the man sitting at the center of its own military intelligence service, quietly photographing documents and riding past CIA headquarters on a trolley. It took 2 Americans to bring him down. That is the part the Soviets never liked to talk about. That their greatest intelligence victory of the Cold War was handed to them not by their own brilliance, but by the treachery of the very country Polyakov had given everything to protect. He was a Soviet general who loved Russia enough to watch it clearly, and what he saw convinced him that the only way to save the world from the men running his country was to make sure those men never won. History has not forgotten him, and neither should we.